And happy Monday, everyone. Welcome. It's 1 o'clock, and here I am. I did have to put the car in helicopter mode to get across the city this afternoon, but I managed to make it, and so here I am. Just a quick reminder about the golf outing. If you haven't signed up, it's a great event, a lot of fun, and I guess there's a euchre tournament. I used to be able to play euchre, but I've been invited to join a foursome. These are very, very daring people, by the way, the Cribs, that invited me to join their foursome. I mean, that's like taking your life in your hands, Brian, Irene. I mean, seriously. I got to caution you. Last time. That's the last one. Now you're on your own. Okay. Ninja. Ninja's going to be, we're going to be making some more, providing some more information soon. And I strongly recommend it. I've been through the program. It's a really powerful program for anybody who wants to kickstart their business, is getting started in the business. It's got a lot of great stuff. This last week was a very interesting week. And when I say interesting, I mean awful. I don't know how else to clarify, to describe it. We're having a lot of situations where lack of clarification within the purchase agreement or within the documents, listing contracts, and so on, that specifics, the lack of specifics, the lack of consequences is causing those contracts to become misinterpreted or interpreted differently by the buyer versus the seller or the agents and so on. So all I can say is we've got to be very, very specific when we're writing a contract to provide specific information, like specific dates, even specific times. For example, regarding possession. When I do possession, I stipulate, as an example, 5 o'clock on a certain day, let's say the 15th day after closing, and then as we approach the actual closing date, then I will actually have both parties sign a revised addendum that says keys are going to be turned over at this time and place, and so on. Because that way there's no argument, well, was it the 15th day or the 14th day? It's very, very specific. It's date, time, place. They're going to be handed to the listing broker or the buyer's agent, whatever it is. Whatever the manner of transferring possession is going to be. The importance of getting clarification and accurate information on the seller's disclosure has become very apparent in the last week as well. As we are ramping up the business for spring summer, we're starting to see that situations where a seller may not have disclosed accurately or fully, and that may ultimately be cause for a buyer to go and sue them for damages. So I think we cannot tell a seller what to put on the seller's disclosure statement. We all know that. I hope we all know that. We can't tell them what to put on there. But if we know that there is, that they are not disclosing a material fact about the property, material defect in the property, then we bear some responsibility and potential liability if we don't take action that is going to protect ourselves as agents and also our broker, because we have a fiduciary responsibility to Five Star as well as we have a fiduciary responsibility to our client. So, for example, if there is a wetlands 20 feet behind the house, behind the patio, and the wetlands is frozen over in November and December and January, let's say, or December, January, and February, buyer purchases it, is not notified that there is a wetlands behind there because you can't see it. It's covered with snow, it's frozen. And then by the middle of April, it has all thawed, and there's a marsh 15 feet behind the house patio. Well, sometimes we know that, especially if the house has been on the market a year. We know as the listing agent that the seller's disclosure form hasn't been forthright. I'll use that word. And I think it's very, very important that you walk very carefully when you get a situation where you know that the seller is not being forthright in their disclosure. Let's pretend they know they have a bad roof or they have a bad furnace, and yet they don't mention it on the seller's disclosure form. What do? I'll tell you what I do. I walk away. I walk away from those kinds of listings because ultimately I'm going to find myself in a courtroom, and I don't like courtrooms. I really don't. And it's going to cost me money, it's going to cost me time, and it's going to cost me mental energy to spend my time defending myself against the allegations that, frankly, I know are true. So when you get down to one of those situations where you know that the seller's disclosure form has not disclosed the true nature of the property, I would caution you as to whether or not you really want to pursue that listing. And have a conversation with the seller that their lack of forthrightness on the seller's disclosure could ultimately cost them a lot of money. I don't know, it may not change their minds, but while we cannot tell them what to put on the seller's disclosure, we can make a decision for our own business and our own liability based on what we know of the property and what they have as compared to what they have put on the seller's disclosure form. I hope that makes sense. Follow-up and communication. Gotten a number of calls in the last week from people who are clients who are frustrated that they can't reach their agent. Agent on vacation, again, leaving, it's company policy to have backup, boots on the ground here in Grand Rapids or wherever your market is, when you leave town. And that's the company policy. And yet we are finding that agents are leaving town and assuming that because of today's technology, they are able to follow up and get the job done. When in fact, what we're discovering is that's not always the case. In fact, quite often, they find themselves in a situation where they're out of communication. They may not have signal or signal strength enough to conduct their business, get on dot loop, email, and so on. And sometimes you got to go have somebody open the door for the appraiser, or you have to, do the same for an inspector or whatever. So it's really, really important that you abide by the company policy. When you leave town, whatever town that is, make sure you have a replacement, a substitute for yourself, so there are boots on the ground. I would also encourage everyone to make a follow-up number, an emergency contact number, in the event we have a client who's trying to reach you and can't. The call ultimately comes to us. And when that happens, please know that if the only number we have is for you, the client is going to be very frustrated that here we are as your broker and we have no way of reaching you either. So if you have an emergency contact number or someone else who's following up on your business, leave that on your voicemail when you leave town, because then we have somebody that we can turn to when we, the broker, get the call. Follow-up. And let me also say that communication is really important. I always contact my clients at least once a week, at least, usually more. Now, I promise them that I am going to update them every single Monday with whatever activity has happened on the house. And I do that through a form that's basically a checklist that says, here's how many showings we've had, here's what feedback we've gotten, here's my recommendation moving forward. And so I do that every single Monday without fail with the clients that the homes that I list. Now, in addition to that, if I hold an open house, I want you to imagine if I'm holding an open house in a 2-hour window and it takes me, let's say, 3 hours to get there and back, put the signs up and so on, and the sellers leave for those 2 hours to go, let's say, watch a movie or spend some time at the mall or whatever, the likelihood is they're sitting there going, honey, what do you think? Do you think we'll get any showings? Wonder how Don's doing. I wonder if anybody showed up for the open house. I don't know. I sure kind of wondered myself. And for 2.5, 3 hours, that's what they're asking. That's what their conversation is about. When you leave the open house, or I'll use my example, when I leave the open house, I shut down all the lights. I make sure the property is secure. All the doors are locked. Any braces that are put for sliding glass doors are back in place. Lock the place up, pick up my signs, and as I'm driving home, I pick up the phone about 15 minutes after the open house. I pick up the phone and I call the client and say, here's what happened. Now, that's not always a fun call, especially when nobody showed up or 2 people showed up and they're disappointed. I get that. But at least they know. They're not waiting until Monday to hear from you. So I encourage you. I didn't always do that. I was tired. I mean, open houses aren't my favorite thing to do. And so I would call them the next day. Well, I can tell you that by that time, they've wanted to hear from you. And so when you have showings, when you have open houses, get feedback to your listings as quickly as possible. You're going to secure your relationship with them by communicating with them quickly and providing them feedback promptly and giving them direction as to how you're going to move forward without being shy and scared to do that. It's hard to go and ask for somebody to give you a price reduction after you're the one who recommended the price. But sometimes that happens. I can tell you this. If a house has been on the market for 30 days, I want a truck like that. Anyway, if a house has been on the market for 30 days and they haven't gotten any showings or any offers, it's overpriced. I mean, either that or the listing agent has somehow managed to make that house invisible on the multiple listing and on Zillow and everywhere else. If it's been on the market for 30 days, no showings, no offers, there's a very, very high likelihood that it's overpriced, and it's time to have the conversation. In a market like this, if you don't have activity within 10 days, 2 weeks tops, I'd be having a sit down with the seller and saying, I think we need to revise our thinking here, because clearly we are not getting the amount of activity that is going to cause this house to sell. Other houses are selling. Other houses are getting multiple offers. So let's go back and revisit this now, because doing it sooner is far better than doing it later. Having that communication is really important. And again, give them feedback, contact them regularly, tell them when you're going to contact them, and keep that line of communication open and healthy. Follow up. We all have verbal conversations. I mean, that was kind of redundant. I don't know how you have a conversation other than verbal. But sometimes your clients rely on what you tell them and you rely on what they tell you, and you have an understanding for a while until you don't have an understanding. So I'm going to recommend to everyone, and I'm going to follow my own advice because I have failed at this. When I have a conversation with my clients, normally, in most cases, I follow it up with an email. And I say, just to reiterate our conversation today, I recommended a price reduction, or whatever I did. Whatever our conversation was about. I suggest we get an appraisal done, or I suggest we get a home stager in to make some recommendations about how to show the house better. Whatever those things are, I put them in an email, because you never know when that client is going to come back and say, well, you didn't tell me this. No, that wasn't our agreement. I don't remember that conversation at all. Or I remember it differently. If you have written communication, email, that proves that you communicated something to them in the moment that you communicated it, when you had the conversation, then you can go back and say, well, why didn't you question me then? When I sent you this email and said, here is our understanding based on our conversation today, why didn't you question me then? And that's a very, very, very powerful piece of information. I will also tell you that it becomes really important when words like lawyer are used. When a situation is potentially a legal matter, it's really important that we have a paper trail that supports your side of the argument. So I encourage you to always follow up whatever conversations you have with your clients with a very brief email. Say, just to reiterate our conversation today, here's my understanding of what we talked about, and here's what we're going to do moving forward. Any questions? Dom is shaking his head no. Daniel, do you have any questions?
Not at this time, sir.
Okay, all right. I think we're good. If you have any questions, please put them in the remarks section, comment section, and to my best of my ability, I will answer them when I have an opportunity. Thanks for joining. Hope that helps today.